In this video, we're going to be answering the age-old question, is bigger better? And today's competitors are the brand new M1 Pros. We have the 14-inch base model and also the 16-inch base model. So this is a battle of the base models. None of these devices have any kinds of upgrades or spec bumps. Now this is going to be a very interesting comparison because this is essentially the same computer here. There are very minimal differences, but there are a couple of big major differences in some areas that might influence your purchase decision. Now I'll also include timestamps down the bottom if you want to skip to a relevant section that you find interesting. You'll also see that both of these devices are at 100% battery. I've just charged them fully. So we're gonna be doing a battery test at the end to see which one will have the most percentage remaining. So starting off with the most obvious differences, let's get some physical differences out of the way. Now I will put the physical size and weight of these devices up on the screen now so you can have a very easy comparison. But as you can see here visually, the footprint of the 16 is definitely noticeably bigger than the 14. You can see we've got at least a couple centimeters down the side. And then if we look at the width there, you can see essentially the exact same. And then if we now look at the weight differences between the two, I will put an exact difference up on the screen now. You can definitely feel the extra heft on the 16. So maybe something to think about if you're going to be traveling regularly. That extra weight is definitely going to add up over time. Now, even though the 16 is bigger, you get the exact same port selection on the sides there. So there's going to be no differences. You also get the exact same vents on either side and also the back. Moving on to the keyboard and trackpad. As you can see, the keyboard is the exact same size between the two. However, I did find the keyboard on the 16 easier and more comfortable to type on because you have a much bigger rest for your palms here, especially if you've got bigger hands like me. Whereas on the 14-inch, your wrists kind of hang off the edge a little bit more and maybe off the sides as well if you're trying to type. So overall, I just think the keyboard, even though it's the same size, is just easier and a more comfortable experience on the 16. Moving on to the trackpad, this is where you can see a major difference. Now the trackpad on the 14-inch is already big enough in my opinion. As you can see here on the 16-inch, it goes up to the next level and it's absolutely massive. So in terms of everyday usage, you're not gonna notice a massive difference, but if you're someone that likes to use the keyboard with their thumbs while you're editing or something, it's gonna be easier on the 16-inch. Now let's briefly talk about the chargers as well. As you can see here, there is a fairly significant size difference between the two. Obviously the 14-inch 67-watt charger on the left and the 16-inch 140-watt charger on the right. Now the 140-watt charger is going to allow you to do a couple of extra things with the 16-inch. Number one, you can charge that battery a little bit quicker. And number two, you also get access to high power mode, but we'll touch on that in a separate video. Now moving on to the screen and the display, again, very few differences here. The major one being, of course, this is a 14.2-inch screen versus a 16.2-inch screen on the 16-inch M1 Pro. You also get 3024 by 1964 pixels as a resolution and 3456 by 2234 as the resolution for the 16-inch. Now those extra pixels might be a little bit more demanding in games, for example, because your GPU is gonna have to push that additional real estate, but in everyday tasks, you won't notice a difference. The big pro of such a big screen is obviously you have much more room to multitask on, or if you're editing, your timeline or your preview can be bigger. And on camera, you may not be able to tell, but in person, this is a lot bigger and a lot nicer to use, especially for a several hours worth of usage over the smaller 14-inch screen. Everything else about the screens though is exactly the same. They both have liquid retina XDR, also P3 wide color gamut, and they both have the same nits of brightness. Now moving on to the performance differences between the two, and this is where you're gonna start to see some major differences apart from, of course, the physical footprint of the larger 16-inch model. So starting with the CPU, on the 14-inch base model, you get an 8-core CPU. 6 of those cores are high performance and 2 of them are high efficiency, versus the 10-core CPU on the base model 16-inch M1 Pro. 8 of those cores are high performance and you get the same 2 high efficiency cores. So you're essentially getting 2 additional CPU high performance cores on the 16, which on paper is around 33%, but as you guys will see, they don't scale linearly. Moving on to GPU cores, you have the same 2-core difference. So you're gonna get 14 GPU cores on the 14-inch MacBook versus 16 GPU cores on the 16-inch MacBook. So that's an on-paper increase of 14%, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll get only a 14% boost in performance, but more on that later. I'll also mention that the SSD speed between the two is exactly the same. They both have the base model 512GB SSD. If you want to get those super fast 7.6 GB per second SSDs, you're gonna have to fork out for the larger capacities. So moving on to some CPU testing, let's do some Geekbench testing to see if those extra 2 cores on the 16 make a difference. So let's switch off the neon sign so you guys can see the screen better. And we're going to start the CPU benchmark on both machines. As you guys can see, we finished the multi-core score and we have 9,959 versus 12,607, which is about a 25% increase in CPU performance on the 16-inch. So let's now come here to a metal test, and this is going to test the GPU, and we're gonna see if we are getting something similar. Now, some interesting results here. As you can see, the GPU scores, we've got 38,511 on the 14-inch versus 40,262 on the 16-inch. That's a difference of less than 5%, which is well under the 15% we would expect on paper. Moving on to Cinebench, which is going to really stress test the CPU, and hopefully this should give us a bigger difference between the two, because this is going to allow the 16-inch to put its more efficient cooling system to use. And when I say more efficient cooling, just that it's bigger, so there's more room for the heat to dissipate. So I'm going to start both of these tests. I'm going to let this run for some time, and we'll come back and we'll do a quick thermal camera test to see how hot these machines get. Now, Cinebench has been running for a while, so both of these machines are nice and toasty. Unfortunately, I can't find out the internal temperatures of the CPUs. The terminal command doesn't work on Apple Silicon Macs, and also the third-party applications like TG Pro do not work. They don't tell you the CPU temperature as of yet. I'm hoping that will be updated very soon, but we can look at the exterior chassis via a FLIR camera. So as you guys can see, the thermal signature looks very similar. If we get a bit closer to the 14-inch MacBook Pro, we can see right in the middle where that M1 Pro chip is, we're getting about 46 degrees Celsius versus on the 16-inch, about 43 degrees. So about a 3-degree difference. You can see at the back where the fan is exhausting, it's getting up to about 45 degrees versus probably about the same, 44 degrees. Still a little bit cooler on the 16-inch. And in terms of the chassis, staying nice and cool on both machines. So about 33, 34, the trackpad about 33, and moving over to the side here about 33. Likewise on the 16-inch, about 33 degrees. And a little bit cooler on the actual trackpad. So almost identical thermal signatures on the exterior, except for the 16-inch, which is actually a little bit cooler right in the middle, right over where that M1 Pro chip is. Now guys, quick note about what you saw before with some of the heat going out onto the screen. That's because on these new Macs, you have an additional vent at the top here. It really doesn't get too hot on the screen, so I don't think you should be worried about it. Most of the heat is going to be coming out of the bottom vent and pushing straight out of the Mac. Now let's talk about fan noise. Both of these machines have been running for 10 minutes. You can barely hear the fan. They're both about as loud as each other, but I can barely hear any kind of fan noise from both of these machines combined over the ambient audio levels in this room. Now that the Cinebench benchmark has completed, you can see the results. So on the 14-inch, we got 9,674 versus 12,379 on the 16-inch M1 Pro. Now that is a difference of about 30%, which is a lot more than what we were seeing in the Geekbench scores. Moving on to a Lightroom Classic export. As you can see here, we have 50 24 megapixel raw photos. And as you can see here, we have some photos of the created cat. Flicking between the two, there is no discernible difference at all. It's very, very smooth. There's absolutely no lag or delay. So let's add a couple of effects and color corrections and export them and see if we can find a difference. And the 16-inch is just finishing now at 28 seconds. And then we have the 14-inch coming up at 33 seconds. So not a huge difference all in all, definitely noticeable between the two, and that distance will increase the higher resolution photos or the more complicated color corrections you add onto your projects. And obviously if you're exporting a massive library of say 500 or 1,000 photos for a wedding or some kind of sports shoot, that time can really start to add up. Moving on to some 3D animation. As you can see here, we have Blender, we have the Splash Fox demo file. Both of them move around very, very smoothly. If we now play both of them, you can see they're both playing back in the full 24 FPS, so no discernible difference there as well. What we're gonna do is we're actually gonna come up and we're gonna render 30 frames on this particular project, and we're gonna see which of these machines can complete 30 frames the fastest. Okay, so I'm going to render this animation. I'm gonna start the timer. Now we are 2 minutes into the render. You can see they're both pretty much neck and neck. The 16-inch is on 12 frames and the 14-inch is also on 12 frames. I have the activity monitor and also the GPU usage charts up so you can have a quick look. As you can see here, the GPU on both machines is at 100% utilization, which is good. And then if we look at the activity monitor, you can see both of them are using around 13 gigabytes of RAM. You can see the memory pressure is almost exactly the same on both of them. Both of them are using 0 gigabytes of swap memory, and they're both using about 13 gigabytes total out of the 16 gigabytes of available memory. So it looks almost identical here, which makes sense. The RAM is the same between the two. The real test is in the final render time. So as you guys can see on this graph, both of them are finished, and the results were a little bit surprising. There was almost zero difference between the two. Now moving on to some 4K video editing, and I am using the 17.4, so the most recent version of DaVinci Resolve for this. If you want to see more detailed and comprehensive editing breakdowns between the two, so Adobe Premiere, also Final Cut Pro and some different types of footage, stay tuned. That'll be its own dedicated video. But for the purposes of this particular benchmark video, I'm just gonna use this. So we have some Sony a7S Mark III footage, very, very compressed, very difficult to play back and also edit. I'll put the exact codec and container up on the screen right now so you're aware of it. As you can see, scrubbing on the 14-inch is very, very smooth. We do get a couple of dropped frames here or there, but nothing too crazy. Likewise, on the 16-inch, I really can't tell any kind of difference. By the way, we are playing back this timeline resolution in 4K, as you can see there. Typically, of course, I would have that set to 1080p while I'm editing, but that's just for the purpose of this video. I do also have some color correction, some LUTs, and some very, very minor effects applied to this timeline. And as you guys can see here, really no differences at all. Now we have a 2-minute long clip at the very start here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over here to the effects tab, and I'm actually going to add a stabilization effect. It's just going to be the standard settings. So let's click stabilize. Let's start the timer. And as you can see, they're both pretty much neck and neck. I really can't tell one of them apart. So I'll get back to you guys in a couple of seconds with the results. Okay, so we are about to finish. I think these are both gonna be almost exactly the same. So 59 seconds to stabilize a 2-minute clip of compressed A7S Mark III footage at 4K. So absolutely no differences there at all, which is surprising because again, this does have 2 extra GPU cores. Now, typically with this stabilization test, it's a good comparison to make between computers because it really shows the differences in GPU power. As you would have saw with my video yesterday with the 2020 M1 MacBook Pro versus the 14-inch, there was a massive difference in the time it took to stabilize that clip between the two. Now, the next step is to render, and as you guys can see, we have about 6 minutes and 15 seconds of 4K footage on these timelines. Let's go into the render tab. You can see I'm going to be rendering in QuickTime as the format, and the codec is H.265. Also going to be at a 4K resolution. So let's hit the render button on both of these, and we'll see which one finishes first. Now, both of these projects are about to finish rendering. As you can see, we have about 8 seconds left on both of them. Again, absolutely zero difference between the two at all. Now remember, Resolve renders are very GPU heavy, so they're gonna be trying to max out your cores. So I'm actually a little bit surprised that we're not seeing a bigger difference between the two. Now guys, I found that result a little bit surprising. So what I did is I went back, I brought a stack more Sony a7S Mark III footage onto the timeline, making it about 20 minutes in total. And as you guys can see here, the 20-minute 4K timeline took just 5 minutes and 18 seconds to render on both of these devices. That is exactly the same difference. And guys, this is full Sony a7S III, 422 10-bit, basically the max quality you can squeeze out of one of the best video cameras on the market currently in terms of DSLRs. That is very, very impressive performance. Moving on to Tomb Raider, and hopefully this is going to give us a definitive answer as to if there are any kind of GPU differences between these two machines. So as you can see here, we have these settings up. I am running both of them at the same resolution this time, so there's no resolution differences of 1920 by 1200, which is essentially 1080p. You can see all the other settings here are the exact same. I have the graphics for both of them set at the highest, so the max they will go. So if we now start this benchmark, let's have a look at the results. Now, a quick note, just while this benchmark is running, guys, and we're waiting for the FPS results, the screens just look so good. So I have them both at max brightness at the moment, and you can just see the colors are so vivid. It's super, super bright. And obviously, if we were able to get up to 120 Hertz, which we can't, obviously, it would be super, super smooth as well. So just makes me excited to see what the future holds for gaming on Macs, because traditionally it's been essentially non-existent. Okay, so the results are in, and again, guys, I'm pretty surprised. So we got an average FPS of 43 on the 14-inch with a GPU FPS min of 32 and a max of 76 versus 47 average FPS on the 16 with a GPU min of 34 and a max of 84. Now, an average difference of about 5 FPS is almost nothing. I think that's probably within the margin of error between the two. Now, you guys might be able to hear in the microphone now, especially that the fans on the 14 have kicked up even more since the benchmark. They are definitely noticeably louder than the 16. The 16's fans are running, but it's very, very low compared to the 14. The 14 is still relatively quiet compared to other laptops out there, but definitely louder than the 16. So it seems to me that it is really starting to tax the chassis, the more narrow and constrained chassis of the 14, once you start to do these sustained GPU intensive tasks like gaming. Now, time for the battery test. So I've been putting both of these machines through their paces for about 2 hours now. So tons of different benchmarks, rendering, 3D animation, gaming, all that kind of stuff. The brightness has been at 100%, completely maxed out. So let's now bring up the battery percentages. And as you guys can see here, the 16-inch is on 66% battery and the 14-inch is on 60%. So to me, that really is not a significant difference at all, and especially because we were really slamming these machines for 2 hours. So I expected it to be a little bit more of a bigger gap than that. So time for some pricing and some purchase recommendations. So as you guys can see, there's really not much difference at all. And is it worth an extra $500 to upgrade from the 14 to the 16? Well, there's only a couple of situations where it is. So starting with CPU performance, as you guys have seen, there's maybe a slight 10 to 15% performance increase, but only when you're doing really CPU specific tasks. So if you guys are developers and you need that CPU for relatively intensive applications, maybe you'll find a little bit of extra performance bonus there. As we can see here, the base model 14-inch MacBook is $1999 versus $2,499 for the 16-inch. Now with the battery life, it makes sense that you will get more battery on the 16-inch, but probably only if you're doing normal every day-to-day tasks such as web browsing, some emails. If you're doing the intensive stuff like what you guys just saw, they're probably gonna last for about the same amount of time. Now, moving on to GPU performance, the extra cores that come with the base 16 made literally zero difference. I really can't find any kind of reasoning as to why you would choose to upgrade from 14 to 16 just for the cores, at least at this point in time. Now, moving on to thermals, as you guys would have seen, the 16-inch seems to run a little bit cooler with regards to the 14-inch, although not by a huge margin. I think the big advantage to the larger chassis of the 16 in terms of thermals are the fans. As you guys would have seen, the fans were a lot more prone to getting up to those higher RPMs on the 14 compared to the 16. It stayed at a very, very low RPM, even through strenuous 3D tasks like gaming. Now, my hypothesis about the difference in thermals is that these base model M1 Pro chips just don't max out the thermal limitations of both the 14 and the 16-inch MacBooks. So what I mean by this is you might see a difference in performance between the two when you move up to the Pro Max chip, which is obviously beefier. You've got more cores, up to 32 cores. That's gonna require a lot more cooling capability. But with just these entry model M1 Pro chips, they're already so power efficient and so heat efficient, it just doesn't really make a difference even in the bigger chassis. At the end of the day, guys, I think by far the biggest factor in your purchase decision between these two base model devices is screen size. If you need that bigger screen or you enjoy having that bigger screen and the better battery when you're doing traditional, browsing or word processing tasks, and also a little bit quieter fan, then yes, the 16-inch would be a good choice for you. But for everyone else, if you're just after pure performance, I would actually stay away from the 16-inch and just get the 14-inch. Anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this particular video. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. But apart from that, I'll catch you in the next one.